Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Special Council meeting in September. Those in the gallery and also those at home, could we please stand in the I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the community.
Almighty God, we ask you to bless this council and allow it to be an agent of change to the people of the city and beyond. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the honouring of your name and the welfare of the people whom it serves.
We gratefully acknowledge the men and women of the Navy, Army and Air Force who made the supreme sacrifice in the preservation of Australia's freedom and democracy. We also proclaim our gratitude to those who returned to us.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. We do have one apology tonight, and that is Councillor Mann. So the first item of business for the Special Council meeting is item 4.1, the Encounter Celebrations Public Art Proposal. And the first recommendation is that Council receive and note the report. Someone like to move that way. Thank you, Councillor. Seconder for that. Either of you want to speak to receiving and noting the report? Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? Those in favour? The second recommendation that Council approve the public art proposal presented by the Encounter Celebrations organisation, subject to, and there are 7 provisions there that I'll take as read. Would someone like to move that second recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And do I have a seconder for that? Speak to that.
I will speak briefly to this. I want to speak firstly to the first item, the location. I think this is the appropriate location for this artwork. I think it will be a stunning piece of artwork. I have to say though, personally, I was a little bit disappointed that we have another whale in the shape of an art form. I think we have quite a few whales around, and there are other totems that the local Ramangiri, Ngarrindjeri people have, such as the black swan and the pelican and many others. Having said that, I think it will be a stunning piece of artwork, and I think the Soldiers Memorial Gardens adjacent to the Fisher Playground will be an appropriate place to place that. In addition to that, though, I am quite surprised at the impetus behind this, because I'm quite well aware of the fact that we do already have quite a magnificent piece of artwork which recognises the encounter between Captains Flinders and Baudin, which is called On Occupied Territory. And I'm quite surprised there is an impetus to have yet another recognition of that. But having said that, I'm very much a history fan, and the more we put our history out there, the better, in some sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Do you want to speak to this, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions as well in this item. There are a lot of provisions associated with this that we're putting onto this particular piece of artwork, perhaps more than we do to most, and I'm wondering why that is. There's in particular, there's a lot of provisions made on the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, which to some extent might be seen to be normal requirements of public art, but to me some of them are also ones that are really could be seen also as being, you know, logs on the road to give this this group and their artwork as smooth as possible a ride. The Soldiers Memorial Gardens, the original proposal for that was that's where it would be. The artist has proposed, and also the Encounter Celebrations Group has also proposed that the public art be put onto Warland Reserve in a corner of the Warland Reserve. To me, I don't mind how many whales we have in Victor Harbor. I expect there'll be lots more. And I know of a couple of proposals that are going to have more whales around. But to me, the placement on Warland Reserve is a reserve that we need to be careful with, because when we put items that are going to be permanent there, and this work of art is going to be there for many decades, that we don't attenuate the options for use of Warland Reserve for other events and festivals, etc. To me, I know the group has to go through some hurdles with regard to heritage for being able to put the work of art down between the Soldiers Memorial and the playgrounds. But I would imagine that it's just a matter of writing some appropriate words, and there's no obvious reason why that wouldn't receive approval. So to me, I'm wondering here, my question relates to why here have we laid down such a lot of conditions, on some of which might be considered normal, but we're really laying them out here as though we're not really keen about having this artwork, when to me, I would definitely encourage any group in Victor Harbor that was like the Encounter Celebration Group, that they have want to put up a piece of public art, that they be given every encouragement to do so.
Mark Grisabella will be able to answer some of your questions.
Through the Mayor, thank you, Councillor Robertson, for your question. The conditions that are listed under recommendation 2 are pretty consistent with how that would apply to council if it were to commission an art piece. There's nothing in there that I would suggest is inconsistent with that. The land is council land, so we need to be a little bit careful in terms of making sure that what's placed on the land is done so in an appropriate way. The intent would be to work with the applicant to help them achieve those things. It's not intended to be a block in any way, but we need to be satisfied that there's things that have been done well on council land. It is a public space, and as such, we need to make sure that how it's delivered is in line with best practice. So we did provide to the applicant early on a whole range of guidelines in terms of public art procurement. And so that's probably helped their understanding as well. They've done quite a good job in terms of the brief that went out to market, and working with Country Arts on making sure that best possible proposal is presented to the council, which I believe they have achieved that. So.
Thank you.
On page 5, under the public art proposal must demonstrate the following. You see down there, point number, I think it's 5. It says evidence of funding source and satisfactory budget. Okay, that's normal. Including an allocation for ongoing maintenance. Does that mean that the proposal has to outlay what the likely maintenance costs are going to be, or does it mean that the organisation has to additionally provide funds for ongoing maintenance, and if so, for how many years?
So through the Mayor, so those dot points have been drawn from Council's public art policy. So that would relate to where we are the developer of the public art. So in this instance, the applicant, being the Council Operations, actually proposed that the asset become Council's asset, and that Council be responsible for maintaining it into perpetuity. So it would be, and then on page, in the budget provisions, there's actually, on page 8, there's actually some explanation around what that would look like for Council going forward. And there's certainly a desire to be looking at all of our public art pieces around town and putting together a bit of a schedule in terms of how we manage all those pieces. So there's more than one. We're developing a number of pieces around town now, so it's probably now timely that we actually look at all those pieces, how we manage and maintain them.
Thank you, Mr. Prisbilla. Any Councillor Littley, and then did you have your hand up, Councillor Glazebrook? No, Councillor Littley.
Yeah, I'm not going to support this motion as it sits based on the location that's been chosen in here. I do flag putting forward an alternative motion and one that would propose this or position this on Worland Reserve. My reasons for that, I had a lengthy chat with proponents of this, and I did at the end of that chat, and having asked a lot of questions where I had some concerns about why not position it at Soldiers Memorial Gardens, I felt satisfied that my questions had been answered, and I told the proponent that I would support their proposal, so that's what I'm doing. I absolutely support this piece of artwork, and I support it going into Worland Reserve. My reasonings for that is that I feel that the future of Worland Reserve is something that's going to come up in the near future, and it has already been discussed in this chamber in a small way. My personal feeling is that avoiding any dramatic change to the look and feel of that space is something that to be avoided, and I think that putting a piece of artwork like this into Worland Reserve does set a standard and does set a forth a vision of what we might have. So while I'm sitting in this chair in this chamber, if I have any influence over how Worland Reserve might look in the future, this is the time to be thinking about that for me. I felt the explanation of why not Soldiers Memorial Gardens being satisfactory, I felt that to be satisfactory for me. One being that it is a memorial garden as such and as named. I discussed whether there was some concern from the proponents that it wouldn't meet state heritage acceptance in that space. I'm satisfied that they felt confident that it would meet the state heritage requirements to get past in that space, and that wasn't the motivation for wanting it in Worland Reserve. Certainly it would help from a financial perspective in getting the project delivered if they didn't have to go through that extra step, but I don't think that was fundamental to them asking for it to be in Worland Reserve. Lastly, I felt comfortable that the proponents had met and consulted with, first of all, Narrandjeri people, but all areas that might have an interest that should be consulted. So my support is to go with the option that the proponents have put forward. So I won't support this, and I do flag if this is lost, then I'll be true to my word and put forward another motion.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'm not supporting this motion as it stands as well, because I think one of the interesting things is location. Location is very important. I think Worland Reserve would be a great location due to the fact we've got the whale centre there in the corner. We have the whale tail, so it's becoming a creation of an art space around whales, one central location. And I think it would really enhance the Worland Reserve and the issues around the history of the whales, what they mean to Victor Harbour in one location, not spread everywhere. So I think I don't support the dot point one because of that reason. I do have a couple of questions though on due process. The artwork, as my understanding, doesn't become a council asset until it's handed over. So how does owner consent go in actually placing and building the artwork on council land? Because it's not in this documentation about owner's consent.
Director Hayter, is that for you? For Mark? I'll ask CEO to answer that. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, through the Mayor. As it's local government land, we still basically provide landowner consent under Section 221 of the Local Government Act. We acquire the artwork and it becomes ours by virtue of it being on our land and by arrangement with the artist. So it's not a problem procedurally.
Thank you. And my other due process question is that has this proposal come through the unsolicited proposal policy? Because in the policy it states any public art must come through this policy. Has it?
So this particular matter has been considered under the public art policy of the council, which actually has some provisions in there that relates to council considering that. And a part of that provision is that it's considered by the council's Arts and Culture Advisory Group, then obviously to the council for a final decision. So.
Just a point of clarification, which policy precedes the other? The unsolicited policy proposal, or does the public art proposal, which one sits over the top of the other? Because I thought this would sit right under the unsolicited proposal policy, because it's a private enterprise coming to do some work on council land, hand it over, becomes council property and maintenance of it. So it fits quite well within that policy. Yes, the public art policy is great, but I think this due process, I think you'll find that it has to come under that one.
CEO Rokoczynski to answer that for you, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, through the Chair. Both are council's policies, so council can either choose to abide by their own policies or manoeuvre however they wish to, as long as it's within the confines of legislation, which it is. So neither trumps as the other, so to speak, and council can always and routinely does make decisions outside their own policy. We, the administration, can't. Council indeed can.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Glasbrook.
Thank you. Just as a question to start with, is there any reason why this needs to be decided tonight? Is there a rush for this decision at a special council meeting before caretaker mode? I'm just a little bit unsure as to why that is.
Mark, could you answer that?
No. Is probably the short answer to that question. There's no immediate, from a council perspective, obviously the applicant's very keen to be able to proceed, but from a council perspective, there's no immediate risk attached to tonight's decision.
Okay, well, I think I'll vote against it. I'm not sure if it's going Soldiers Memorial Garden or Wallen Reserve, to be honest, but I'm probably a little bit disappointed that it wasn't sorted out before now. We've obviously got this group that are not happy with this proposal. They would like to have it somewhere else. Whether we need to have a little bit more of a conversation and sort it out rather than just impose on them where they go. But that's only my opinion, so there's no rush. What's the rush?
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Henderson, would you like to close the debate?
I will close the debate just by adding that I hope the elected members, excuse me, have read the feedback from the Arts and Culture Advisory Group too, who strongly felt that Wallen Reserve was not the right location. And part of the reasoning behind that is there is already going to be, once Albert Place is complete, quite a lot of public art in that space. We already have the whale tail with the fountain. We have unoccupied territory. We're going to have a new piece in Albert Place itself. And really, the whole advisory group thought it was going to be overkill in terms of placement of public art in one relatively small area. So that was the thinking there. And I agree with Councillor Glasbrook. There probably isn't any rush to make any decision on this. And in fact, the other feedback from the Arts and Culture Advisory Group, that they, as a whole, felt it was a little rushed, that we didn't have enough time to discuss this as fully as we could have done, because it only came to us at a meeting last week.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I'll now put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That recommendation's lost. Thank you. You foreshadowed another recommendation, Councillor Littley.
I did, and I'll stick to that. So the same recommendation, but with the public art piece to be positioned on Woorollen Reserve.
Do I have a second for that? Councillor Schofield. Councillor Littley, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I said plenty before, but I did just, I think I've got one question, and that's with regards to the fact that this was put forward to potentially be on Soldiers Memorial Gardens, and we've voted that down. Has the RSL been consulted with respect to that placement? Is that, if I can just get an answer to that, please.
Mark?
Yeah, through the Mayor, yes, they have. They've written back to the proponent, advising they have no objections to it being placed on that site.
You happy with that, Councillor Littley? Councillor Schofield, would you like to speak to this? No. Does anybody want to speak to this? Councillor Robertson, then Councillor Kemp, then Councillor Glasbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Putting the sculpture on Woorollen Reserve, all we've done there is just saying that it's going to be on Woorollen Reserve. We'll have to delete, of course, the next to the George Fisher Playground. I think that if it is a desire of council to put it on Woorollen Reserve, we need to have some considered discussion about whereabouts it goes. Because while Woorollen Reserve is a reasonably expansive place, it's one that does get a great deal of use, and for increasingly complex events and festivals, and also with the forthcoming, I'm not sure when, but forthcoming, whether it's next, well, it won't be next year or the year after, the development of the foreshore down near the entrance of the causeway, that this is the sort of thing that needs to be looked at in the whole area. And if you agree to one right now, we haven't defined in here the positioning of the space that's proposed on Woorollen Reserve is right up at the easterly end of the reserve, and whether that's the best place, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But
as you can see, if you have a look at the new recommendation there, Councillor Robertson, it's got positioned on Woorollen Reserve with a specific location within the area subject to final negotiation and approval by council administration to take into consideration potential impact or restrictions on the space for other users. So I'm sure that what you're talking about will be taken into consideration if this passes. But I think those are very good points.
I can see that it does, Mayor, that I can see that where it is on the photograph, but that to me is not precise enough in terms of that area, because that area gets a great deal of use. And then I guess it means it comes back to council again for another decision as to where it is, but and doesn't get done by the administration.
Well, the motion says final negotiation and approval by council administration. So I'm not sure that it would be coming back to council if this motion passes the way that it's written.
Oh, well, I
Councillor-
think it needs to be put in, that it comes back to the council.
Did you want to make an amendment?
Yeah,
And your amendment is?
sorry, that the final decision on location on Warren Reserve comes back to the council.
Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Kemp, seconding that amendment? All those in favour of that amendment? And those against?
Point of order. Do we not have an opportunity to discuss why I'm supporting as a second?
We've got an amendment.
Yeah, we can talk to the amendment.
Amendment comes first. Can we just wait until Katie's got this down?
My question was, do I not get an option to do a variation?
Amendment's passed.
Again, not the means that I'm concerned about.
So can speak. Yep. Yep.
Amendments, variations.
Yeah, all right. So we have got an amendment up at the moment, and the amendment was seconded by councillor Kemp, who actually can speak to that amendment if you'd like to, councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. The reason why I support the amendment, because I think the nature of the sculpture, the cost of the sculpture, is a big project, and the location is very important. I think it should come back to chamber for discussion and debate for a decision to be made there and not left to administration. I think that's because of the size, location. It's very important we get this right. And I think it's a chamber's decision, not an administration decision.
Thank you. And can we have a look at that vote for the amendment again? So does anybody else want to speak on the amendment?
I'll just speak on it to say that I was happy to have a variation, so I support the amendment as well.
Thank you, councillor Litterly. Does anybody else want to speak on the amendment? I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour of the amendment? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The amendment now is part of the motion. And spoken to the speak to the So councillor Kemp, because you've spoken to the amendment, you've taken to the amendment relates. Councillor Glasbrook, did you want to speak to the motion?
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that I won't be supporting this for the same reason that I didn't support the last one. I really think it's important that the arts group and the proponents and the council administration and elected members get together and sort this out together. That's my belief.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Litterly, do you want to close the debate? No. In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That has been carried. We now move on to 4.2, which is the 2023 Adelaide Fringe, Victor Harbour. The first recommendation is that council receive and note the report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconded by Councillor Hales. Either of you want to speak to the report? No. Does anybody want to speak to the report? Put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 2, that council approve the hosting of the 2023 Adelaide Fringe Festival as outlined in the report, and transfer of $25,000 from the Tourism Down Under job number to support the Adelaide Fringe Festival initiative. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On the first part of this, we're doing both these dot points 1 and 2 together, right?
That's correct. Recommendation 2.
I wish we wouldn't do this sort of thing. Anyway, it's done. So on the business of hosting the Fringe event, I think it's great that we do that. We've been a long way behind for quite a few years on both getting ourselves involved in both the Fringe and Sala. But on the Fringe event, to put some money into getting acts down for that is great stuff. I think the hosting of the 2023 Fringe Festival, I'm wondering if that shouldn't be the, in principle, hosting of the Adelaide Fringe Festival in Victor Harbour. It looks like here that the activities we're going to do is laid out on the top of page 26, which is a primary event similar to the Fringe on Tour held previously, while supporting the marketing of Adelaide Fringe related events under the one program. And if that's all it is, then us hosting the Adelaide Fringe Festival is fairly limited event. Also from the, I think that what I would like to see out of this is a lot more information provided on what we're going to do in relation to the hosting of this, of the Fringe Festival next year, including that if this is $25,000 being spent on acts coming from Adelaide or overseas or interstate to come down to Victor, to what extent are we putting out some money that might be involved in offsetting some of the costs of any other local events that might come from the South Coast here, or indeed if we and would be encouraging the events that come from Adelaide to pass on skills and knowledge in relation to those events to local performances. So to me, I appreciate the work that's gone into this assessment. Appreciate that probably there is a need to start up putting budget aside for this to let the Fringe organisers, even though it appears to be a long way off, it's not very long in terms of event organ management. And so we have to do this before the new council comes into being, probably before it could address something like this in December at probably the earliest, or January, which will be too late. So I appreciate the rush, the effort that's gone into this, but I just get the feeling that we really need to have looked at this in more detail, so that we could saying, are we really doing a good enough job? It may even mean that it comes up for, it warrants, further budget expenditure.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. A question to begin with. In relation to this event, is this looking at like the one-day kind of event that we have previously seen?
Through the Mayor, yes, that's correct. Similar to the caravan that's been held on Woolland Reserve, with a series of acts performing on the day, with affiliated events as well. So the idea is actually to extend what's been done previously, working with venues around town to actually increase the programming just beyond the one-day event that we've had previously.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess in relation to that, and in relation to another agenda item that's coming up later this evening, the events and festival sponsorship program, the amount of money for a one-day event, while it is an excellent event and provides a great resource in terms of a free event that's very accessible and a lot of fun, but when we compare the amount of money going into that versus the amount of money that we're giving out to, I guess, much larger events, that some of which are free and accessible, like the Christmas pageant and the like, but other events like the Red Hot Summer Tour, when you look at the economic value of these events, I guess I'm questioning whether $25,000 for this event is of best value to us, having had to go through the process of all of the other event applications and go through it kind of and comb it down to such an extent and take it from about $40,000 down to $20,000 that we actually gave out. And then this event is $25,000 in and of itself. I question the value of putting this money here as opposed to possibly putting the $25,000 that is not being spent due to what's happening with the tour, and putting that back into the festival and events grant pool, because it's especially considering that we took it from $40,000 worth of applications down to $20,000, has left the grant pool with about $3,000 for round two, which all of the recipients that we've recommended deserved the money, but I'm sure that in 4 or 5 months' time, when round two comes around, those recipients will also deserve money. And especially if we do have the capacity to attract events of the size and scale of the Red Hot Summer Tour, ones that have huge economic value to us, as well as bringing something new and exciting. I guess a one-day event on Woolland Reserve that hits a certain part of the community, I don't think warrants $25,000 in the light of that. I think it's a good event. I just don't think it's $25,000 worth of good. And so I guess for that reason, I'll be voting against this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Does anybody else want to speak? Thank you, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Again, it's on these situations where, it's a great event, good opportunities for our community, economic development, but there's a couple of issues that I do find. One is the value situation, as Councillor Hales has outlined. The other one is the amount of workload that's on staff to actually go out and do this. When you look down the breakdown of the budget, the marketing, site management, all those things. I do have major concerns about the wellbeing and health of our staff. We've been talking about this over the last few weeks about the workload that staff's got. And here we are. If we approve this tonight, it will put more workload onto our staff to manage it and to make it happen. So I won't be supporting this on those reasons of staff and health and wellbeing, and also the fact of the value. And I think that the opportunity after the new year, where that 25,000 could be spent elsewhere and be more value, to the community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this motion? Councillor Henderson, do you want to close it? No, in that case, I'll put the motion, the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That motion's lost. We move to item 4.3, which is the Sport and Recreation Grants Program. The first recommendation is Councillor Receive and note the report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Littley, and seconded by Councillor Kemp. Do either of you want to speak to the report? No, does anybody want to speak to the report? All those in favour of receiving and noting it? Those against? That's carried, thank you. The second recommendation is that Council approve the Sport and Recreation Grant Guidelines as provided under separate cover. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Littley. Moving that way and seconding that is Councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Littley? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. I would like to speak to this. Appreciate the work that's gone into this report we have, and also the attachment, which I didn't bring along with me, but the guidelines. I have some real problems with the guidelines that we have. We don't, as a council, put a lot of money for distribution into the Sport and Recreation Grant. And now we're introducing to this, it's going from being a relatively meagre grant proposal to being a mega one. We're introducing into this which I think it needs a lot more thought, that we've got up to $100,000 now for major grants, which are all to do with infrastructure. They can, maximum amount that any one organisation or club can get is $20,000 out of that $100,000 of these major grants. And as we know, you can get about 1/5 of a toilet block for $20,000. It's not a lot of money. Of course, it's all helpful, but not a lot. And to me, this sort of thing, if this is going to be a means of appeasing clubs who may wish to want to get major grants out of the council to match grants that will be provided by Sport and Rec in South Australia or from out of federal funds, but it's not going to be a good enough show, because we know from the last couple of years where we've provided a lot of grant funding for the Victor Oval, also for the Encounter Bay Oval and the buildings that are around that, and some of the clubs that are in there, that these days it costs a lot to put capital arrangements in place. I also don't see us doing a lot in these grant programs to help clubs ease the cost of entry into a particular sport. I know that there's mention in there of how you're going to build club facilities that are going to reduce the cost of entry, but I've never seen it happen. I think that, you know, the more you stick into a facility, we're going to bump up against this in terms of the proposed major Sport and Rec complex on Route 202, that the bigger you make it, the more the operational costs become. So here also, I think we've got 50% of a grant in this grants program. At 50%, you can get a matching grant.
You have 1 minute left, Councillor Robertson.
Yeah. you've got 50%. I think that should be 75% to make it builds stronger clubs, and it makes sure that clubs are able to show the ability to maintain and service the facilities. And just briefly on the individuals grants, I don't know why we bother with it. It's a very, very, very small amount of money, and I've never seen yet from the programs that have been done how the sports in general, the clubs in particular, have benefited.
Thank you,
I think
Councillor.
this needs a lot more discussion, this particular, in the new council.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak to this recommendation? Councillor Little, you didn't speak to start off with. Did you want to close the debate?
I will do, thanks. I guess my comment is that just referencing some of the things that Councillor Robertson has said there, I think he's a little bit off the mark as far as just how much of an enabler a $20,000 grant or a maximum of $20,000 grant from this council could be for individual clubs in our district. I suggest this amount sits right in the pocket for many clubs seeking to upgrade their facilities off their own backs, and where they're not seeking larger grants from where they're competing in a pool of funds for state money or federal money. This is the kind of thing that gets your lights at your club with your volunteer fundraising efforts or your club's fundraising effort. This is how you get all new lights or a fence around your tennis, a fence or new nets for your tennis club, things that all those costs are going up. $20,000 does enable you to play sport for many of these clubs. It could have been the thing that would keep a lot of clubs going. A lot of clubs that have now shut down because they weren't able to get these not insignificant amounts of money from their local council or from local sources. So I encourage it. And just on the individual side of things, $400 going towards getting a kid to sport, with the amount of sports that kids can get involved in these days and the cost of those, that is a big amount of money. It's not a pittance at all, and those people that do apply for this very much value it.
Thank you, Councillor Little. That closes the debate. I'll now put the recommendation 2 to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 3, that Council endorse releasing the 2022-23 Sport and Recreation Grants Program for applications in November following the local government elections. Moved by Councillor Little and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Little? No, Councillor Henderson? Does anybody want to speak to that? If nobody wants to speak to that, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. And the 4th recommendation is that Council note the Sport and Recreation Grant Working Group will assess the applications received for the 2022-23 Sport and Rec Grant Program and provide recommendations to Council. Moved Councillor Little and seconded Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to item 4.4, which is the 2022 Festivals and Events Sponsorship Program, Round 1. Council receive and note the Round 1 report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded by Councillor Hales. Either of you want to speak to receiving and noting the report? Anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Second recommendation is that Council decline the application from Como Music Fest received under the program Round 1. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, councillor Robertson. And seconded by, thank you, councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'll speak to this one, but it is also in light of the others. As I mentioned earlier, there was like $40,000 worth of applications. There was only about $20,000 to spend. We had to make, I guess, we used the matrix and made value judgments against economic benefit, the appeal of the event, livability, community activation, promotion of Victor Harbor, their environmental impact, and the sustainability of the event to decide which ones should be funded and which ones, I guess, had to miss out this time due to the nature of the event or nature of the events that they were up against more often than not was the main factor. So yeah, with that, totally support the panel's decisions on these.
Thank you, councillor Hales. Councillor Robertson, did you want to close the debate? No. I'll put that recommendation to the floor then. All those in favour of recommendation 2? Those against? That's carried, thank you. The third recommendation is that council decline the application from Great Southern Broadcasters for the 2023 Music in the Valley event as received under the Festivals and Grants Sponsorship Program, and that council provide marketing support to the event with no budgetary impact. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, councillor Hales. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, a question. Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at the last line of that that item, which says, council provide marketing support to the event with no budgetary impact. That to me is an oxymoron. If we have marketing support to that, whether it be from our own staff, it all has budgetary impact. And I come back to the point that was raised previously by Councillor Kemp about marketing support to this at a time when we're trying to reduce the workload on staff. My question is, what exactly is that marketing support going to be?
Mark Crisabilla.
Through the Mayor, that is simply just presenting the event on our website, so it's no different to what we'd do otherwise in terms of supporting events. In terms of efficiencies and load on staff, we're about to launch a new tourism website in the next couple of weeks. We are much better placed than we have ever been to resource the marketing support of events, and that will follow through with the work on the brand this financial year as well. So what's in that resolution is no different to what we'd do for any other event in the community or organisation.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any further discussion in relation to recommendation 3? Councillor Hales, did you want to close anything? Put this to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 4, that council grant $4,000 cash and $2,000 in kind to Rotary Victor Harbor for the Christmas pageant. I'll take the rest of that recommendation as read. Moving that way, councillor Robertson.
Sorry, I think we're doing conflict of interest declarations.
Yeah.
There's a one at a time. Sorry, councillor Robertson.
Yes. Can I have a conflict? Thanks. Okay. Perceived conflict of interest, but I'll stay in the chamber and but I won't vote on this.
Councillor Hales.
Perceived conflict of interest as well as a member of the Rotary Club of Victor Harbor. But as this is an interesting common and has a wide effect on the whole community as a whole, I'll be staying in the chamber and voting on this.
Thank you. As I am a member of the Rotary Club of Victor Harbor, also I have a perceived conflict of interest, but in chairing this, I don't think that's going to make any difference. And if I do need to vote on it, I will. I'm not involved in the Christmas pageant at all, and I've got the same amount of interest in this as the rest of the community. So would someone like to move the recommendation? Thank you, councillor Schofield. And councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? I'll put it to the floor then. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. The fifth recommendation is that council grant $8,700 cash and $700 in kind to 180 Degrees for the Red Hot Summer in support of the application received in the Festivals and Events program. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Hales and Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. There was a decent amount of discussion in the panel about this particular event, and especially in relation to its size and scale versus the other events that it's sitting within the Festival and Events Sponsorship Program with. I think it's broadly accepted in the community that the first event that was held was a very big success, and that it's the type of event that the community would like to see moving forward. There was lots of discussion around how best to handle this event, and I certainly believe that in the future that this event should sit outside of this sponsorship program, similar to that of Schoolies and our Rock and Roll Festival and the like, our other flagship events. This is of size and scale enough that the council should be seeking to establish an ongoing partnership with the event organisers to continue these events in our community. So I certainly support the proposed sponsorship as outlined in this motion, but also foreshadow a motion that council move in that direction of establishing an ongoing partnership with these event organisers.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. And I've just been told there's a slight error in that recommendation. It should be that the council grant $8,000 cash and $700 in kind sponsorship. Is that correct, Mark? 8,000 cash? Okay, thank you. And Councillor Henderson, did you want to speak to this? Does anybody else want to speak to this? Thank you, Councillor Littley, and then Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, I thank Councillor Hales for that explanation and giving us some insight into the discussion that was had, because that was one of my, or this was where I had a big question on. This is a commercial event. We remembering the first one, we backed off a little bit on our cash sponsorship because of that reason, and I think the event has shown, and certainly also the mounting excitement for the next coming event, which is going to fall in before this one, has shown that the community has embraced this, or it is something, a pathway that they want to go. But my suggestion was going to be that surely we should be making a partnership with this and seeing how more we can value add to it or get more out of it as a community as well. So thanks for that explanation, and I'll vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Councillor Robertson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I want to echo the support that's given to have these major events, which I think that with especially the Red Hot Summer Festival has smartly rebooked itself for the following year. And I would imagine that they'll be here for a long time to come unless something adverse happens. That we shouldn't be running that sort of program through this sponsorship program, which I think is aimed at more of our, or should be aimed more at the local festivals and events, and those that are relatively small, because I think that the ones that have been on the council's list for many, many years, like the Christmas, well, especially the art show and the, but also the Christmas pageant, that these ones don't come under these, because the rules under the, I mean, the guidelines under which these festival and events programs operate really are not terribly well suited. They work, but they may be better off having program guidelines that are more suited for larger events.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Glasbrook?
Well, I won't support it. The reason why they wanted to come back so quickly was because the event was very, very profitable. And I think that it is really, these types of grants are for virtually not-for-profit type organisations and small groups in the community wanting to put something on, not a very large business making a huge profit. I'm very much in favour, as I said last time, with, for example, the dust suppression. Don't forget there's $10,000 there, so $5,000 for each event, which I supported and still support because I think we need to provide them with a suitable facility. I'm 100% support waiver of fees, I 100% support road closures and councils working with them and making their life as easy as possible. I support all of that stuff, but I don't think that we should be giving a large business like this cash. So I won't be voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Again, I like to see in these documents sometimes the full costs shown, not on separate pages, because the community would like to know what the full cost. So it's really about not $8,000, $12,000 to help support this event, plus the other 700. So, it's not just 8,000, it's the other 5,000 for the dust suppression. But I guess the first time we supported this was to see how the event went and how successful was it, and it has been very successful. So I think an organisation like this, of the amount of money and profit that are made out of it, that they would come back here again without any financial support from council. We can support them in kind with some road closures and things like that, but not cash advances for them, and prepare a facility, to suit their needs. Yes, but I think to give them cash, I don't think it's warranted in this case. I won't be supporting the cash component of this. So I won't support the whole project at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Robertson, you've spoken. Have you got a question?
No, Mayor, but I'd like to foreshadow a motion. If this item 5 is lost, that we bring it back, but take out the $8,000 cash and leave the in-kind sponsorship element in there to make it clear that we would like to provide every assistance possible to the event to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion, Councillor Henderson?
I did forego my right to speak earlier. May I speak now?
You forewent.
Okay.
Have you got a question?
I'll ask a question then of Mr. Prisabilla. My question is, do the promoters, it's the promoters who are applying for this grant funding, do the promoters themselves actually make very much money from such events?
The short answer, I don't know. One would assume they wouldn't be doing it if they weren't making a profit. I guess the other point is that based on what we know, the event sold out in March. It's sold out for November. One would assume that it'll sell out again in March of next year. I guess the other element is that my understanding is the $8,000 would actually go towards closing roads. So it's actually not an offset of the cost necessarily of the event. It's actually supporting traffic management around the site predominantly.
Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Hales, do you want to close the debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, as I said, I fully support this item, and I think that at the cost of $8,000 cash and $700 in kind, even once you add in the $5,000 we've put aside for the event's dust suppression and taking care of Kent Reserve, is a bargain for what our community gets out of this. if we think about the number of people coming down here who almost certainly stay the night in our community, either rent a hotel room or book an Airbnb, the economic activity generated from our, quick maths would be $14,000 investment is huge. Compared to some of the other things we do as a council, the economic impact of this event is massive on our community. And therefore, I believe that this is wise investment of council money. It's not overly burdensome on our staff like other events we were concerned about. This event is run by other people, and you know what? If they make money from it, good, they'll come back. They'll keep providing excellent events for our community that especially my age group in the community loved. And last time, the music acts, let's be honest, weren't really my generation's music. They still bought tickets, they still went, they still had a great time. So this is what we need more of in Victor Harbor. This is a wise investment, and the wider impact from our small investment is definitely worth it. So I'd encourage members to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. I'll now put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you.
Division.
Can I have a division? All those in favour? Councillor Littley? Councillor Hales? Councillor Schofield? And Councillor Henderson, and against Councillor Glasbrook, Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson. That motion's carried. There is an addition to recommendation 6. So it currently reads council grant $1,000 cash to the Science Collective, and it should read council grant $1,000 cash and $600 in kind sponsorship to the Science Collective. So if you can just make a note of that, please. Would somebody like to move recommendation 6? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded by Councillor Kemp. Would either of you like to speak to it? Councillor Henderson? No. Councillor Kemp? Does anybody want to speak to it? In that case, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Recommendation 7 is relating to $2,000 cash and $500 in kind for the Sid James Triathlon. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson and Councillor Kemp again. Do either of you want to speak to that? No. Does anybody want to speak to that? No. All those in favour? Those against? Sorry, can we just do that again? All those in favour and those against? That's carried, thank you. And the third one, number 8 rather, is council grant $2,000 cash and $400 in kind for the 2023 Summer Sand Sessions. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson and Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Littley, does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. As I mentioned earlier, I foreshadowed a motion. I actually have 2 motions that I would like to move. The first one being that Council explore establishing an ongoing partnership with the organisers of the Red Hot Summer events 180 Degrees.
When you talk about an ongoing partnership, can you be a bit more specific about what you mean? Because I understand that Council's working with them looking at future.
Yeah,
things.
so
what do you mean by
suggesting, as per the discussion from the panel, which staff would be well aware of, that we move from them having to apply through our event sponsorship program into the more of a formalised manner in which we deal with our other larger events, as I mentioned earlier. So it is intentionally non-prescriptive as a motion because it is simply saying that Council is desiring staff to start looking at more of a event by event basis and start looking at it as more of an ongoing, this event is coming up, when are we programming it, how can we facilitate it?
Okay, so you'd like to move that. Do I have a seconder
Correct.
for that? Thank you, councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that, councillor Hales? You spoke a little bit.
I
Would
think
you like
I've
to say
spoken to it
anything?
enough.
You've spoken to it enough. Councillor Robertson, do you want to speak to it?
Yes, Mayor, first of all, I'd just like to ask councillor Hales, could we have an amendment to that? I totally support what he's saying, but we've just highlighted two only events here. We haven't talked about the Viking Festival, for instance, which is still ongoing. The Spring Festival, I'm not sure whether that's happening this year or not, but there are other, major events here, including Rotary Art Show, that we really need to put them on a more professional footing. The whole marketing arrangements, the in-kind arrangements, and everything else, and take them away from the situation where we could be seen to be in denying the organisation $8,000 for the for the sponsoring of the 180 Degrees Red Hot Summer Festival. We
So
could be seen.
what's the variation that you're looking for, councillor Robertson?
I'd like to say that there'd be all major events, or if we wanted to list them, I would say that they'd be, including or add in there Viking Festival, the Rotary Art Show, any of the other ones that
Well, you need to be specific
Tuna
so
Festival.
that councillor Hales knows what variation he may or may not agree to.
I'll just flag it early. I probably won't agree to a variation of that nature. I believe that due to the commercial nature of this event and the scale of it, it fits outside of similar events. I believe those events are important and absolutely sit within this program and should be supported thoroughly through this program. But they are more community scale events where this is more of a regional scale event and therefore needs to be handled differently.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They are already and could become even bigger, and that's true. It needs to be something that's more professionally organised.
Okay. Did you want to have an amendment?
Advance.
Did you want to make an amendment, or are you happy to second this
No,
as it stands?
I'm happy with councillor Hales's explanation.
Would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I think that this is an excellent presentation, an excellent motion in a direction that we as this council should be going. Not coming back to, very small sponsorship programs which are clearly aimed at local performing arts, and we separate them because there's a whole lot of conditions for success, the way in which they're handled, booked years in advance, etc., that we need to put ourselves on a more professional footing than going year to year with mixing apples and oranges with festivals and events.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? If not, I will put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you.
Mayor Jenkins, now trying my luck with a second motion within this agenda item. As previously pointed out, the fund that sponsors the festival and event sponsorship program, as a result of tonight's motions, will now sit with $2,600 within it remaining for round two for events like the Viking Festival, like the Spring Fair, like the events that Councillor Robertson has outlined. So I would like to move a second motion, and that is that Council reallocate $25,000 from job number 48972, which is the Tourism Tour Down Under funds, to job number 48979, being this one, to help support round two of the festival and event sponsorship program. As outlined in the fringe motion, this money is sitting there and is not assigned to anything, and elected members are well aware of that. Elected members are also well aware of the nature of the funds remaining within this program. And so I believe it's a reasonable motion for those reasons.
Do I have a point of order, please?
What is your point of order, councillor Kemp?
Technically, this is a motion without notice, technically, and I believe your ruling, Mayor Jenkins, is that any motion without notice with any budget requirements in it cannot be heard and has to be put into motion on notice.
I've only just heard this motion, councillor Kemp. I haven't asked for a seconder, or I've just heard that. So your point of order is overruled. But I do understand your reasoning behind this, and I think you're quite correct that it is a motion without notice that does talk about considerable funds. So it may be worthwhile if we're able to make it a motion on notice for the next council meeting, then we can do that. You'll need to have a chat with the CEO to see whether or not a motion such as that is able to be carried out during caretaker period.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins.
We now move to 4.5 rather. The Arts and Culture Grants Program, round 1. I'm happy to take these two recommendations on block if someone wants to move them on block. If someone would prefer not to move them on block, we can do them separately. You happy on block, Councillor Henderson, and Councillor Robertson, you had your hand up. You're happy to move them on block?
Yes.
Do either of you want to speak to them? No. Does anybody want to speak to them? All those in favour? Those against? Excuse me. That's carried. Thank you. 4.6. The Main Street Precinct Business Revitalisation Grant Program. The first recommendation is council receiving and noting the report. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And seconding that report, Councillor Hales. Do either of you want to speak to receiving and noting it? Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. I have two recommendations here, either 2A or 2B. Would somebody like to move one of those? Councillor Robertson, 2A. The recommendation 2A that council approve the grant applications under the Main Street Precinct Business Revitalisation Grant Program in accordance with Table 1 in the report, and the required funds of $200 be transferred from economic development, other expenses to economic development grants budget to support them. $200. And moving that way, sorry, Councillor Robertson, do I have a seconder for that? If I don't have a seconder for that, then that motion will lapse without a seconder. Councillor Robertson, that motion has lapsed as it does not have a seconder. Does somebody want to recommend 2B? Councillor Hales. Do I have a seconder for 2B? Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Littley. Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I had a quick opportunity tonight to go through the applications and the various quotes that came in to ensure that the criteria was adhered to, but the two I did look at, the criteria, it has not been adhered to the criteria. On there where we had a dollar for dollar, where the people who are putting the application have to put up 50% of the costs. In one of the applications there, it had no contribution from the owners for the renovations of their property. So that's, I don't know how that got through. And the other one also didn't quite cover off on the criteria, what I could see, to be a viable one as well. So there are just the two I looked at quickly in the time I had to myself. I don't see how these come to chamber when they don't meet the criteria. Secondly, has council advised the ones with development approvals, possibly requirements, that undertaking this type of development, they may be under additional costs for fire safety issues and disability access and inclusion in renovations of their property, which is not covered in their quotes as what they're trying to achieve. So I'm not quite sure whether the owners understand, you know, the requirements of major development upgrades for development approvals where other factors may come in. So I'm not quite sure what has been sent out and what has been advised to the shop owners and why some of these have come here when they're not fitting the criteria.
Perhaps Mark can respond to that for you, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. We have Louise Hample here with us tonight. They spent a lot of work and time working on these applications and going back to a lot of applicants. So I'll take over the Mayor, let Louise respond to those questions.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you. So Councillor Kemp, a lot of the applications came in with forms that didn't have clear budgets in terms of 50-50 contribution, but we went back to them and advised that a 50-50 contribution would be required, and they agreed. So in the folder, there's also email correspondence between them. So all the applications that are presented to you tonight for approval are in accordance with the guidelines. Your questions in relation to development approval, the ones that do require it, they have been advised of the additional costs that would be possibly need to be had in relation to both the application process and any additional works as well.
Thank you for that. Again, it's just what you read is what you're trying to understand. So I do appreciate your statements there. Generally speaking, I wouldn't support this process, adding additional costs to our budgets. But because I see this as a one-off due to the Main Street upgrade, I think this is an opportunity for the businesses to get ahead and to get some relief and support for them. I would imagine this must, as I said, be a one-off. It won't be a continuous process that will happen on a regular basis for council. But because of the situation that traders are in at the moment, I think, you know, they need some more stimulus to help them. So that's why I'll support it at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to this motion? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, Mayor, I had one question on this program. Do those businesses that have been selected, are they in? Is their intent, or is it their deadline that they will finish this work before the end of this year, or are they going to be able to spill that over into next year, and if so, when?
Sorry, through the Mayor. Yes, they will be able to. We put the acquittal date at the 30th of June 2023.
Okay. Right.
Thank you. Is there, Councillor Litterly, you didn't speak as second. Have you got a question? No. Does anybody else want to speak to this? No. In that case, Councillor Hales, do you want to close the debate?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. As highlighted by Councillor Kemp, this is once off. This is an acknowledgement. We're supporting a program that we put out and asked for applications for, but also an acknowledgement of the disruption caused from the Main Street works. Any disruption to trade is annoying. A significant disruption to trade is much harder than annoying. So I think it's good that we're supporting the businesses through the program that we set out. The fact that it's oversubscribed is a good thing. It means these businesses are engaging with what council has put out there. It means that we hit the nail on the head in terms of the program of support offered. So yeah, fully support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. I'll now put that recommendation 2B to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. And I know that when I went and visited the businesses the other day and walked up, that many of them were very appreciative of the council support for them. And they were also very appreciative of Outside Ideas who are building the road there. Not one of them actually said anything negative about the contractors and said that they'd been extremely helpful. They were ahead of schedule. They were doing as much as they can to support the businesses. And they were also appreciative of the grant program that council had offered and of the council staff. The third recommendation is that council provide delegation to the Chief Executive Officer to approve minor amendments to the projects that are approved under the grant program, providing they are within an existing budget and in line with the intent of the program. Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson seconding that. Councillor Schofield, did you want to speak to that? No. Councillor Henderson? Does anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. .7, review budget framework policy and community grants policy. I'll do that recommendation en bloc unless anybody has got any thing against that. If somebody would like to move on block, Councillor Robertson, you want to move on block? That receiving and noting the review. Okay, so the first recommendation is receiving and noting the report. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson and Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to receiving and noting the report? Councillor Robertson, do you want to speak to receiving and noting the report?
Yes, briefly, Mayor. I found I was puzzled why both of these policies were lumped under the one item here in the council, because they're both of huge difference in terms of their importance and in terms of the impact on the council's program. So I just wanted to say that appreciate the work that's gone into both of these. A lot of work has gone into them, but that they were lumped together in one item on the agenda, I thought wasn't very helpful.
Perhaps I could ask the CEO why they're both put together.
Through the Mayor, just for efficiency, matter of preference, could be done separately, could be done together. We chose together.
It may be worthwhile in the future doing them separately so that they can be discussed as separate items for clarity, just for clarity, if that would be helpful to the members. Does anybody else want to speak to the report? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The recommendation 2, that council adopts the budget framework policy and the community grants policy as provided. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Henderson, no. Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, Mayor. On the budget framework policy, don't know if I'm too late for this, but I think this one should be adjourned to the new council. The reason for that is that there's no huge imperative for that to be, I don't believe, but I stand to be corrected, that there needs to, there's no huge imperative for this policy to be passed right now. It's an ideal sort of entree into a new council to be able to understand what goes on in the budget framework, to be able to discuss it at the policy level. And I think there's some, I have a lot of small items I would like to have proposed to be corrected in this this draft that's been done. A lot of work has gone into it, but there's quite some here that I'm quite happy to provide to the administration in afterwards, saving having to go and discuss them, basically typo errors and some things like that. But to me, this particular policy is one that would be an ideal entree into a new council. And there's no need for it to be done right now, but I'm happy to hear if it is.
Does anybody else want to speak to this? You can move an amendment for this to be. You can move an adjournment if. I'll just check to see whether or not you can call motion after you've spoken to it. Motion if you want. Councillor Robertson, because you have spoken in the debate, you cannot move a formal motion. So item 12 on our meeting procedures says that a member who has not spoken in the debate on a question may move a formal motion. Councillor Kemp.
I move this item be adjourned.
Do I have a seconder for that? A member who has spoken may second the formal motion. So Councillor Robertson is seconding that. There is no debate on a formal motion. All those in
excuse me. Sorry, I can speak to the motion as an adjournment. As a mover.
You should ask to speak at the time, but I'll let you speak to it if you'd like to.
Thank you. I'll move to adjourn this motion until the new council sits after the elections, at the first opportunity. The reason why I'm moving this as an adjournment motion is due to the fact that there are elements in here which has certain aspects of ramifications about the decisions of chamber have been taken away from them and giving more power to the administration to make decisions about projects out of scope of budgets and things. We are the responsible people accountable for the budget and the plan. We delegate that to the administration through the CEO, but decisions about making decisions outside of scope of the budget and things like should be a chamber's decision, not an executive decision. And I think there's got to be a bit more work done on this, and I think it's a type of a policy I should think the new council should need to look at, because it will affect them, and that's what this motion will do, will affect their ability to do their job as I see it. So I think that's why I adjourned it for that reasons.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp, and Councillor Robertson is seconding that formal motion. All those in favour? And those against? That is lost. We carry on with the motion. And the motion is that Council adopts the budget framework and community grants policy as provided at attachment A and C. Moved by Councillor Henderson and seconded by Councillor Schofield. Does you want to speak to that, Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. For some of the reasons that my colleagues have put forward, I support this motion where they came to the conclusion that they don't support it. I think that a new council coming in, especially if there's a lot of new members, they haven't been through a budget cycle. They don't actually understand how, they might understand how other budgets work, but they don't understand the nuances of this organisation. And therefore, I think we, at this point in time, we've been here for 4 years. We know how these things work. We know how these policies play out in reality. And therefore, I think we're best equipped to be doing this review now. But also, it's a council policy. If the new council on day one decide they'd like to review it, they can. So we're not binding their hands in any way, shape or form, but we are using our best judgment in order to help keep things flowing on as they should in the meantime while a new elected body takes their place, and can then decide to review such policies in their own time once they've gotten through the other mountain of paperwork they have to go through first. So for those reasons, I'm supporting the policy.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Is there any further discussion in relation to recommendation 2? Councillor Henderson, did you want to close the debate? No, in that case, then I'll put recommendation 2 to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. Certainly, all those in favour? Councillor Litterley, Councillor Hales, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson, and against Councillor Glasbrook, Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson. And I agree, I mean, this council has got considerable expertise and 4 years worth of experience in the chamber and is experienced in budget cycles and setting budgets, and I think that it's very onerous to ask a new council to have a look at this policy straight away. So I think that that's a good decision of council. The 4.8 is the art, curatorial and preservation policy, and I'm happy to do those recommendations en bloc. Are you happy for that, Councillor Kemp? Would somebody like to second that? Councillor Schofield, thank you. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Kemp? Councillor Schofield, do you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. 4.9, the Beachside Markets application for a fee waiver. And can you please note that recommendation 2 talks about a fee waiver for the market being held on the 28th of August, but there's also another market on the 12th of October, where on the 9th of October, I beg your pardon, where there'll be a clash, and so you may want to insert that in there as well. Are you happy for this recommendation to be done en bloc? If so, would someone move it en bloc, please? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. I think that there are 2 clash timetables. I'm informed there are two, not just the one on the 12th of October.
That's the one that I just said. So there's the one on the 28th of August. And as I just stated, there is also one on the 9th of October. So I've asked for that to be inserted into the...
And I think there's another one in October as well, isn't there?
Through the Mayor, I believe the second one's on around the 23rd of October. I think this is Sunday.
Mark, the 22nd is the artisan markets. They don't clash. So the 28th and the 9th. Is there anything further you want to say, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. These clashes, this highlights to me that I really hope that we can avoid these clashes by having a calendar that stretches, a year in advance for these events to be, so that we address arguably the most frequently asked question in Victor Harbor. I wish I knew when things were going on. I wish I knew when activities were were coming up, so I can plan for that as an individual. And, you know, this is something that we desperately need, and I really hope that the new website that's being produced will really address that problem, because I know from personal experience with some music events that are being held in Victor that forward, even though calendar is provided 12 months in advance, that that it's a struggle to make sure that it gets onto at least the promotion on the council website. So just hope that this would be the last time we have to spend council time on this sort of thing.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I have a few questions first. Basically, I understand that the beachside markets pay council rates on the site they hire as part of the process. They pay a site hire per week. Does the artisan markets pay council rates for the site they hire, and do they also pay site fees?
Mark, can you answer that, please?
Sure, through the Mayor. So no, they don't. So the arrangement with the operator is that we support him to get off the ground. And so the intention is for us to, in the near future, have a discussion about that. There's no provision at the moment in our fees and charges for a site fee for that precinct, but it is appropriate going forward that there is a fee in place. The agreement with the operator is for 18 months, and the intention was to review that during that period to allow the operator to get financially stable. And given the popularity of the market and the volume of stallholders, we're finding that that's happening faster than we expect. And so it would be fair for a prescribed fee to be set by the council in the near future in relation to the use of that site.
Thank you. The $2,000 the council puts towards the artisan markets, what's that used for? Can you provide an answer?
Through the Mayor, that's just purely operational costs. So an example of that, we made a contribution to the operator to undertake road closure training so that they can set up sustainably in the future to close roads if the event is held in Ocean Street. We've helped out with some sort of supplementary marketing costs in the early days of the market. We've also helped out with the placement of some picket fencing in the street, given that Railway Terrace is open during the construction works. The intention of those funds is purely just operational. It's not intended to subsidise the event. And so we expect that in the future that we as council step back from any contribution to the market and let the business of the market fund itself. That's always been the intention of that event.
Thank you, Mark. Last question before I make my statement. Why? I know we got an email from the beachside market proprietor about us seeking a waiver. Why is council supporting that? Why is council actually want to waive a fee for each of the markets when they coincide? What's the reason why we got to waiver this fee? Because to me, that's losing revenue for no reason.
Through the Mayor, it's simply a recommendation. Council can, of course, resolve contrary to that recommendation, and it was about trying to make it a bit more equitable. You have received a deputation from the K-Woods in the gallery tonight in relation to trying to make that a fair playing field. We're in very different situations with the two markets. One's in its infancy and we've been trying to get some traction on that, and one's a very well-established market. Ultimately, it's up to council as to whether they make this decision to waive the fees for market clash days or not, and of course up to council in future regarding what Mark was saying around future contributions from either of the markets. It's entirely at council's discretion what they charge for each of the markets in their area based on the timing, the location, the amount of space they take up.
Thank you, Acting CEO. Look, I won't be supporting this agenda item I believe the best solution all round is that the artisan market doesn't run on the same day as the beachside market. I think because I think we are verging on the principles of competitive neutrality. And I know that the Local Government Act only refers to competitive neutrality to the subsidiaries of council, but the Government Business Act of 96 Part 4 talks about local government and agency, that you can't have a competitive process in place which supports a local government enterprise over a private enterprise where the local government gets a bit of a free kick. So I would suggest for a small £300 that we should put this to the Small Business Commissioner and ask him, is this a breach in competitive neutrality, instead of us forking out money. I think it would be a simple solution to a quick inquiry from the Small Business Commissioner to say, is the council in breach of competitive neutrality?
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Glasbrook?
Just clarifying, are we talking about the 2 dates or just the 1 date at this stage?
2 dates.
So we are moving both dates? Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Schofield, do you want to close the debate?
Thank you. This is a very, I believe, a very tricky situation. I've moved a recommendation because I believe at this particular stage there appears to be a lack of communication, and therefore this should go ahead. But what I would like to see, that the communication between any organisers that are coming into town, whether it's the beachside markets or something else, that we communicate very well with them to ensure that we don't clash. It is having a competitor. There's nothing wrong in business in having a competitor, but I think we just need to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So at this particular stage, I will and am supporting this, but I would like to see some sort of plan put in place that it doesn't happen again. And I would also get some advice on where we actually sit legally for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. That closes debate. And just for clarity, that fee waiver is $300 per event, and we've got 2 events there, so that's $600. I'll now put that to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you.
Call a division, please.
All those in favour, can you please stand? Brian Littley, Tim Glasbrook, Nick Hales, Ross Schofield and Marilyn Henderson. And those against, David Kemp and Andrew Robertson. That motion is carried. We now move into our confidential items. The first one is item 5.1, and the recommendation is that we go into confidence as this agenda item is commercial information of a confidential nature, the disclosure of which should reasonably expected to prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied the information, in that the Minister has not yet publicly announced the proposed ambulance station. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by, thank you, Councillor Robertson. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you.